The moment that changed my life wasn't a miracle or a tragedy. It was the exact second I realized my own mind had been lying to me, and I had believed it completely. Not questioned it, not doubted it. Just believed it the way you believe gravity. The way you believe that up is up and down is down. I was 39 years old. I'd been in therapy before several times, actually. But I'd always approached it like I was approaching a problem that needed solving, like I was broken and I needed someone to help me fix it. I go in, I tell them about my anxiety, my insecurity, my constant sense of not being enough, and they give me tools. Breathing exercises, cognitive reframing, all these things that were supposed to help, and they did help. A little bit. But there was always this undertone that never quite went away. This constant whisper underneath everything, that voice. I didn't call it a voice. I thought it was just me. I thought it was my intuition, my wisdom, my honest assessment of reality. But it was saying the same things over and over like a record that got stuck. The same poison on repeat. You're too late. You're not enough. Everyone else figured life out, but you're fooling people. They're going to realize you don't actually deserve any of this. Stay small. Apologize. Disappear. That's what keeps you safe. Most people think the hardest battles are fought out loud. Mine wasn't. Mine was silent. Quiet enough that nobody around me noticed I was losing. I was winning on the outside. I was successful. I was working. I was visible. And I was absolutely deteriorating on the inside. Nobody saw it because I'd gotten very good at hiding it. I'd learned somewhere in my childhood that the safest thing to do was to keep the real damage hidden. I had this thought once, I'm like a building that looks fine from the street. But if you open the doors, you'd find the walls are rotting. The infrastructure is crumbling. Everything looks okay until you look inside. And I lived like that for years. Functioning on the outside, fracturing on the inside. And the voice, the constant whisper, it was telling me this was normal. It was telling me this was just how life was. Everyone else was fine, and I was the problem. Everyone else had figured it out. And I was too damaged, or too broken, or too late to ever catch up. Until one day, I almost didn't walk into a therapist's office. I almost didn't go. I'd been in therapy for months at that point with someone who was very kind and very smart, but I was still stuck. I was still hearing that voice. I was still believing it. And I almost decided that therapy didn't work, that I was beyond help, that this was just how I was going to feel forever. But I went. I went because something in me, something small, something quiet, something that hadn't given up yet, something told me to show up one more time. And in that session, my therapist said something that cracked my entire world open. It was a simple sentence, 6 words that rearranged everything I thought I knew about myself. Your mind repeats what it learned, not what is true. I remember the exact moment she said it. I remember what I was doing. I was looking down at my hands. I was playing with a thread on my shirt. I was doing what I always do when something real is happening, which is to distract myself so I don't have to fully feel it. But I heard it, and it landed. It hit me harder than any heartbreak ever did, harder than any rejection or failure or disappointment, because suddenly I saw my life for what it was, a set of old survival patterns masquerading as destiny. My fear wasn't natural. It was trained. My self-doubt wasn't instinct. It was inherited. My constant desire to shrink, to apologize, to stay invisible, to take up as little space as possible that wasn't personality, that was protection. That was a survival mechanism that had outlived the danger. I had learned early, very early, that the safest thing I could do was to disappear. I had learned that when I took up space, when I was visible, when I demanded anything, bad things happened. So I'd learned to be small. I'd learned to be grateful for whatever scraps I got. I'd learned to apologize for existing, and my mind had turned that into a rule, a law, a truth about the universe. But it wasn't the truth. It was a memory. It was a pattern. It was my childhood, still running the show from inside my adult body. I sat there in that office staring at the floor, and I asked myself a question that I'm still asking myself: how much of my life has been lived according to lies I never questioned? The answer terrified me. The answer was probably most of it. Most of my life had been lived in service of a fear that didn't actually exist anymore. Most of my choices had been made based on a story my mind had learned a very long time ago and never bothered to update. I thought about all the opportunities I turned down because my mind told me I wasn't ready. I thought about all the risks I hadn't taken because my mind told me they were too dangerous. I thought about all the connections I'd avoided because my mind told me people wouldn't actually like me if they really knew me. I thought about how much energy I'd spent trying to be safe and invisible, when the thing I actually needed to do was become visible and real. It was like watching my entire adult life from the outside and seeing how much I'd been controlled by a program that wasn't even mine. It was like realizing I'd been a puppet, and the puppet master had died a long time ago, but nobody had told me I could cut the strings. Here's what's strange about seeing a pattern. The moment you see it, you can't unsee it. The moment you understand that your mind has been lying to you, you can't go back to trusting it blindly. You can't go back to unconsciousness. My therapist and I sat there, and she explained something about how the brain works. She talked about how the mind is designed to predict danger based on past experience. How if something happened to you when you were young, if you learned that the world was unsafe, your brain is going to keep scanning for danger for the rest of your life. It's trying to protect you. It's not trying to hurt you. It's just doing the only job it knows how to do, keep you alive. But sometimes the brain gets it wrong. Sometimes it sees danger where there isn't a. Sometimes it repeats old patterns long after they're useful. Sometimes it's so focused on protecting you from the past that it actually prevents you from living in the present. That's what was happening to me. My mind was trying to protect me from a childhood that had already ended. It was trying to keep me small, to keep me safe from dangers that no longer existed. And in doing that, it was literally preventing me from living. I didn't become confident overnight. That's not how this works. I didn't wake up the next day and suddenly believe in myself. I didn't magically stop overthinking or self-doubting. The voice didn't disappear. It's still there, actually. But something shifted. The moment I saw the pattern, I stopped being controlled by it. That's when healing began, not when everything felt better, but when everything finally made sense. When I could look at my fear and go, oh, that's not intuition. That's a survival mechanism. When I could look at my self-doubt and go, oh, that's not reality. That's a story. When I could look at my desire to shrink and go, oh, that's not personality. That's protection. And once I could see it, I could start to question it. I started catching the lies one by one. Not all at once, not dramatically, but in small moments. My mind would say, no one actually cares about you. And I'd stop and I'd think, is that true? Didn't my wife tell me she loved me this morning? Didn't my friend reach out to check on me last week? Isn't that evidence that contradicts this thought? My mind would say, you always fail. And I'd stop and I'd think, is that true? Or have I succeeded at some things and failed at others, like every human being ever? Isn't that a story? Not a fact. My mind would say, you should stay small to stay safe. And I'd stop and I'd think, is that true anymore? I'm an adult. I have agency. I have choices. I don't need to stay small anymore. That was a childhood rule. It no longer applies. These were little corrections, small rebellions, tiny mental revolutions. But they added up. Over months and years, I started to notice the moments when my mind was lying. And in noticing them, I started to have a choice. I could believe the lie, or I could question it. I could let it run my life, or I could run my own life. There's a Buddhist concept called Buddha mind or beginner's mind. It's the idea that wisdom comes from being willing to question what you think you know. It's the opposite of expertise. It's the willingness to approach everything as if you're seeing it for the first time without judgment, without the filter of old patterns. That's what I started to do with my own thoughts. I started to question them like they were someone else's opinions, not facts about reality. I started to notice the difference between this is true and my mind learned to think this way. And that difference changed everything. I started making different choices. I started saying yes to things that scared me, instead of automatically saying no. I started having conversations instead of assuming people didn't want to talk to me. I started taking up space instead of automatically shrinking. And interesting thing is, nothing bad happened. The catastrophes my mind had been warning me about didn't actually occur. In fact, the opposite happened. The more I questioned the lies and acted anyway, the more I accumulated evidence that my mind had been wrong. And that evidence became stronger and stronger until eventually the lies couldn't survive anymore. They couldn't withstand the weight of lived experience. I'm 56 years old now. That therapy session where I learned that my mind repeats what it learned, not what is true, that was 17 years ago. And I think about it all the time. Not because I've solved it, but because I understand now that healing isn't about making the voice go away. It's about changing your relationship to the voice. Now when my mind whispers it's old poison, I can hear it. I can recognize it. I can go, oh, there's that old story again. That's the program that kept me alive when I was young. Thank you for trying to protect me, but I've got it from here, and then I make a different choice. I choose differently. I act differently. I believe differently. The biggest transformation in my life hasn't been becoming a new person. It's been realizing I was never broken. I was just trained to doubt my own worth. I was never fundamentally flawed. I was just running a program that was designed for a different reality. Once I understood that, everything changed. Not my circumstances necessarily, but my relationship to my circumstances. Not my mind's tendencies necessarily, but my ability to work with them instead of being controlled by them. There's a phrase I like, the observer effect. It comes from quantum physics. It's the idea that the moment you observe something, you change its nature. The moment you become aware of something, it's already different. That's what happened when I realized my mind was lying to me. The moment I became the observer of my thoughts, instead of being completely identified with them, they changed. They became less powerful. They became information instead of truth. They became patterns I could work with instead of facts I had to believe. So if you're out there right now and you've been listening to a voice for years that's been telling you that you're not enough, that you're too late, that you don't deserve good things, that you should stay small and quiet and invisible, I want you to know something. That voice isn't you. It's a program. It's something you learned. It's something that was installed in you probably long ago, probably. For good reasons, probably because it was trying to keep you safe, but it's lying to you. It's not telling you the truth. It's repeating patterns. It's playing old recordings. And the moment you see that, the moment you become the observer of it, instead of being controlled by it, everything changes. You don't have to believe it anymore. You don't have to let it make your decision. You don't have to structure your entire life around avoiding the dangers it's warning you about. You can question it. You can test it. You can accumulate evidence against it. You can choose differently and find out that the catastrophe as it promised never actually happened. The biggest revolution isn't external. It's internal. It's the moment you realize that the enemy wasn't out there. It was in here. And now that you see it, you can do something about it. You can catch the lies. One by one, small rebellion after small rebellion, tiny mental revolution after tiny mental revolution, and slowly, more slowly than you'd like, but more consistently than you'd expect. Your mind stops sounding like an enemy and starts sounding like a home. Not because it stops criticizing, not because it stops warning you, but because you finally understand what it's doing and you can work with it instead of being controlled by it. That's healing. That's transformation. That's freedom. It starts with one sentence. Your mind repeats what it learned, not what is true. And then everything changes, not overnight, but forever. Start questioning, start noticing, start catching the lies, and then start building a different life. One choice, one moment, one small rebellion at a time.